Hello, happy Wednesday, and welcome to my stream. My name is EC, and I like to have respectful conversations about nuanced topics. Today, we're going to be revisiting a concept that I covered in relation to three specific artists, J.K. Rowling, Neil Gaiman, and Hugh Jackman, in my video When the Artist Betrays Their Art and You. Except now we're going to explore something a little bit deeper, which was actually brought up in the comments. And that was what happens when you find out that an artist you perhaps revered, or at the very least has been socially canonized or upheld as an incredible artist, an exemplary component of their genre of creation, actually turns out to be a really awful person. So what do you do then? Especially if the artist is no longer living. For example, Oscar Wilde, Pablo Picasso, what's his name? Go again. He was all these people that were, definitely upheld as incredible artists. Many look back on their work very fondly, or were so incredibly inspired by the art that those creators made that it led to changes in how art was made going forward. And if you engage with that art now, what do you do when you realize that whatever personal idea you had about them is not exactly accurate? So we're going to explore that in today's stream, and I hope that you enjoy. So we're going to get started in just a second. I'm just going to send this off real quick. And okay, so I recently found out, and I did not know this. I don't know why I didn't know this, but I did not know this. I recently found out that Oscar Wilde, when he went on trial for indecency, the people who actually testified against him were children, and they were boys. And at the time of his trial, the issue at that point was not the age of the people testifying. Most of them were 14 years old, or very close to that age. They were certainly nowhere near to close to the age of consent by our modern day standards, and by standards at the time, which was 16 years old, they weren't close enough then either. But when the trial went underway, it was not highlighted or identified as a major issue that he was having any kind of relationships. Especially, they were specifically pointing to physical relationships, intimate relationships with 14-year-old children. It was the fact that those children were boys. If Oscar Wilde had been having a set of relationships or intimate experiences with 14-year-old girls, that would not have been seen as negative in the way that it should have been, because the age was not the major factor. Now, in our modern day, we can very easily understand what is wrong about that. And I was surprised because I had not realized that that is not something, certainly not the first thing you know about when it comes to Oscar Wilde. I have a very strong affinity towards Oscar Wilde's work, as I'm sure many people do. Another creator that I knew was not a good person was Pablo Picasso. Pablo Picasso was again somebody who was extraordinarily misogynistic and deeply abusive to his partners, and caused them sincere harm in many ways. In our modern day standards, he would not be upheld as a positive person. He would absolutely be held to under scrutiny on a public level for the way that he treats and treated women. But both of these artists are long dead. They have passed away a long time ago. And those are just two examples, but there's so many more. Caravaggio, for example, was also got in trouble for assault. So, and Caravaggio is an incredibly important painter. I've referenced and used multiple paintings of his in different videos I've already done, especially when I was doing the language of hair. And that surprised me. But those are again just three examples of different people who've actually been extraordinarily harmful in their lifetimes towards others. And that is, I mean, if you upheld them to modern day standards, they for sure would not be artists that I would ever advocate supporting due to their cruelty and their treatment of others. And it would be a little bit easier now that I think we can understand to some degree that how we interact and support artists is very important. We do have a power as an audience to hold artists accountable when they do bad things. But when the artist is not alive and has not been alive for a very long time, what do you do then? So that's what I wanted to talk about in today's stream. If this is your first time jumping into one of my streams, I'm glad you're here. And if you have time or if you are interested, please don't forget to subscribe. I am currently working on another video. I've been working on one for a few, since the last one. And it is in a very different vein, very different topic than I normally explore, but it was too interesting to pass up. I do, again, go live on Wednesdays. Hey, Brant, hello, hello, hello. Yeah, I go live on Wednesdays, and the timing is kind of all over the place, but I am here, and I also do Discord connections on Sundays. So if you're ever interested, please don't forget to jump into my Discord as well. It's linked in my bio. But yeah, how are you doing, Brant? We have a bit of a different topic from last time today. Thank you. Thank you. I got these at a really cool kind of vendor thingamajig. Oh, hey, Rusty, how are you? Hello, good to meet you. And I'm excited. I feel like one of the funny things about separating the art from the artist and the conversation in that vein is every time I hear anyone talk about it, the concept is always there's a lot of nuance and you can't come to a definite conclusion. And while I agree with that, I do feel like everybody kind of says ultimately very similar ideas and very similar things. However, I haven't been seeing the more recent conclusions that people have been coming to repeated often if you look back in time about how people refer to separating the art from the artist. So that kind of leaves you wondering, what do you do when it's an artist that isn't alive anymore, that is no longer able to personally profit or harm others with profit from their art? So I thought that was kind of an interesting opportunity to explore that a little further. Yes, that's very true, Brant. That's very true. Brant says when they are dead, they're no longer profiting from their work. Yes. And that does kind of give rise to maybe an opportunity to feel differently about how you would interact with their artwork than you would if you're interacting with artwork from somebody who is still able to profit and, worse than that, harm others with the profit that they are able to make from your support of their work. So it kind of leaves you in an odd space because like, for example, I was very surprised when I found out about Oscar Wilde, but was I in the same level of frustrated and uncomfortable as I was when I found out about the any of the people that I covered in my video? Nope. No, I wasn't. And it's because I have no personal sense of awareness of them as breathing, living humans who you conceptually could come across at some point in life. Now, does that mean that if you can come across a person in life, that means their artwork has more personal value to you? I don't know. And Rusty says, many don't profit when they are alive. You are right. You're right. Many, many artists are barely able to find the type of financial compensation for their creations that, especially, I don't know, pre 2010, people probably still could. So, Brad asks a good question. So, if the art is not harmful, does anything personal with them matter? That is a very good question, because does a person's ability to find camaraderie or ability to find the possibility of a connection with an artist change the way that you view the artist? Like, I don't believe that I will ever meet Hugh Jackman. I don't believe that I will ever meet Neil Gaiman. I don't believe that I'll ever meet J.K. Rowling. The likelihood is next to zero. And I don't think that when I was engaging with their work, I had that assumption or sense of possibility at any point either. But how is that different than engaging with art made by Oscar Wilde? Because what do you do with an artist after they have become, I guess, their art, has it shifted in any way in your personal sense of their work if you find out that they have done very harmful things? I mean, like, for example, Gauguin, that's his name. Gauguin, and who was a painter at the same, very, very close to Vincent van Gogh, very, very involved in his life. He abandoned his age-appropriate wife and their children to go live in Tahiti, and then created a series of works about the people who lived in Tahiti, especially he portrayed children that he was having relationships with, which I don't want to call it relationships, actually. Children he was preying on in his work. And he also portrayed Tahiti in a very, very colonial and racist lens, which just, adds even more layers of problem to the entirety of his work. But many people found and still find a lot of positive in his work. He is not upheld to the same social standards that if somebody did that today, they would be. I mean, if an artist, say a major artist, and these are, again, maybe physical media creators like painters with Gauguin, if they had today been upheld as like an amazing artist, very highly respected, and then people found out that they had been literal predators, I don't think that would fly very well. People would not be very happy about that. And Brant says, you never know. Life leads you to random places and meeting people you never thought you would. That's fair, Brant. I mean, okay, so I guess interesting context maybe. I worked as an extra on major film sets for a while, and I met a lot of people I never thought I would ever be in the same building as. So, there's that. That is funny. But would that also in any way shift my perception of them as artists or creators? Actually, you know what? Maybe. Because there's this one actor, his name's John Barenthal, and I was on one of my very first jobs was on a set with him, and there was actually a situation that arose where someone was like a person who was not part of the set was harassing an extra who was on the set, and instead of like sending a PA um, or distancing himself from that situation, John Barathol himself walked over and navigated that situation and ensured that the person who was being um, made uncomfortable was safe and also given space, and kind of took care of that situation in a way that was very unexpected, considering the expectation that anyone who is at that level of stardom would probably not even notice if something like that was happening. So I will say, as a result, I have a little bit of a softer perception of him as an actor. Although, does that affect his acting ability at all? No. But I will say I have a softer perception of him as a creator, probably because of that incident, and realizing that he did one of those situations where there was a opportunity to not become involved, and he chose to become involved in a way that was very, I guess you could say, mindful and nuanced, which is good. But again, does that mean that is that gonna also mean that when if he anything ever does come out about him as a person, that is not positive, or even downright criminal or dangerous, that I would be more hesitant to believe it because of one experience I may have had in. Yeah, yeah. Hey, Ellie. Hello. Yes, the Punisher. So Ellie's like, so the Punisher is a decent guy. Perhaps he might be. I can only speak to that one experience I had, and that wasn't even a direct experience so much as it was me seeing something happening in front of me. And Brent says, I have seen some interviews with him, and he seems like a good guy. You're right, Brent. I will say there are definitely opportunities through interviews to perceive a person and try and evaluate who they are, and there are certain things that you can evaluate from there as like, well, maybe they are a pretty good person, and it's kind of impossible to know. Yes, Brant, you're right. He has said that the Punisher would hate ice, and I think that that's very true. The Punisher would, because if you think about the story of the Punisher, um it's very anti systemic abuse. That's the entire point of the story. It's the entire point. But that is one of the things that is, I think, one of the biggest misconceptions and misunderstandings about a story. Is it's like when people misunderstand Fight Club or The Matrix or The Punisher as a pro red pill sort of situation. Um, Ellie says, you see, I have a similar situation with the Rocky movies. I love the Rocky characters. I adore Creed movies, but also understand that Sylvester Stallone is a Trumpy. He is? Why am I surprised, actually? But also, what? Ugh. I mean, I don't really know why I would be surprised, because I have no context to evaluate any assumption about his sense of morals or comfort with cruelty. I have none. But other than the movies that I have kind of seen him in, sometimes barely, I will say, unfortunately, I have not seen many of his films still. Um, at the same time, it's interesting because these are all still people who, like right now, we're talking about John Barenthal, we're talking about Sylvester Stallone. These are all people who are alive and who have very real capability of committing some kind of harm towards others that could affect people in the same universe that we all exist in, and could be made public through various forms of news. And I include social media in that because I do think that in many ways our modern methods of maintaining community communication is now through social media. So Brant says repetitive brain trauma is common among the Trump folks. Yeah. Repetitive desires to avoid the humanity of anyone who, of anyone except yourself. Yes. Yes. Oh God. Ellie says that Sylvester Stallone was giving a presidential medal by Grossman himself. The gross. Not a fan. Not a fan. But okay, so let's look at so I was wondering how many of y'all knew about Oscar Wilde? Was that a piece of information that was surprising for you? Because it was surprising for me. And I don't know why I didn't see that one coming, but I didn't. And I think it may have to do with my assumption, right, Brent? Yeah, okay. So that's not out of left field then. So, because I was not expecting Oscar Wilde to have been a predator attracted to children. I did not expect that. I was very surprised. I knew that he had my understanding of what had happened with the trial was not that there were children that had come forward. Oh, you're right, Rusty. Bill Cosby, Michael Jackson. Yeah. But that I hadn't anticipated. Michael Jackson's a difficult, case as well because he may not be alive any longer, but his estate is still profiting from his work. Oh, Ellie, I'm sorry, you didn't see that part. Okay, so Oscar Wilde, I'm going to repeat this real quick. Oscar Wilde, when he was put on trial for homosexuality, although it was not directly identified as homosexuality, rather indecent behavior, was put in prison, the people that were brought in to testify against him were not adults. They were children. They were 14-year-old and younger boys. And I did not know that. Now, at the time of the trial, the social perception of what was so wrong was not the age of those people. It was their gender. It was the fact that his predation was towards boys and not towards girls. Because if they had been 14-year-old girls, Oscar Wilde would not have been found in great would have not been found at a negative light the way that he was because they were boys. And it's not just that at that moment there was a set of there was a very concerning amount of children who came forward to discuss having physically intimate relations and being predated by Oscar Wilde. It was that they were boys. That was the issue, and that was the big problem. Yes, Rusty, Jerry Springer is a big... That doesn't surprise me at all. That does not surprise me at all. Not even a little bit, which is... But... yeah. Rusty, also, I'm glad to meet you. I hope you're doing so well. Happy Wednesday. Thanks for being here. And I appreciate you participating. It's really nice to be able to expand and get to know more people. But yeah. Jerry Seinfeld. Oh, yeah, that's not a surprise at all. LA says, why is it that every time there's a male author in existence, there's always an asterisk next to their name? That is a very fair question. That is a very fair question. And I think that maybe gives more of an opportunity to discuss the concept of power and those who attempt to attain it. Now, not every single person who happens to be an artist that is recognized for their work turns out to be an awful person. It just so happens that there is a surprising consistency among some of the people who are upheld the highest, who do seem to have this issue. Like Edgar Allan Poe being desperately in love with his 13-year-old cousin and marrying her. Ugh. Or who is it? Jerry Lee Lewis also had a 13-year-old wife. What was it with 13? Oh, God. And then, Oscar Wilde. Now, Oscar Wilde at the trial, it wasn't just at the trial that this happened. When he was released, he did end up forming and he was in his 40s when he did end up passing away, his mid 40s. Like, he ended up in another situation with a child who he stayed with for the rest of his life. Was also, again, a child, a boy, a little kid. And yes, you're right, Bran. Elvis 100% as well. She was 14 years old and he was 24. That is really not okay. Really, really not okay. And he, also used his power and influence and control and celebrity status to predate on her and on others. Cassandra Peters, who became Elvira, also at 15 had a relationship with Elvis when she was a showgirl in Vegas as a child. I mean, Cassandra Peters has a really fascinating history and has been around for things that you may not have thought of. But yeah, oh my God. But she also had experiences with Elvis that we now understand to be predation, but at the time was not seen in that way, which is frustrating. But so, figures like Elvis, figures like, I don't really know anything Jerry Lee Lewis has done. I'll just know this name and what he has, his very unhealthy relationships. But Ellie, Stephen King hasn't done anything evil, right? He just writes about it, right? I don't know. I don't have any confirmation that Stephen King has done anything evil. I know that he has not had the best takes a couple of times, but I don't know much about that. I know that there are things that for some reason aren't coming to mind immediately that left a bad taste in my mouth and surprised me, considering he kind of presents as a relatively more progressive person. I think there was something, actually, I think it was about the J.K. Rowling situation and Trump as well, where there were comments that he made that surprised people because they seemed to be contradictory to his general overall mentality. And Brent says he writes so many books he has no time to do anything bad. He's a Red Sox fan. I mean, sure. I will totally admit I know nothing about baseball. I know that there is a Red Sox and a White Sox. That's all I got. This is interesting music. Oh, it's from... I see. That was from Cowboy Bebop. Okay. Ellie said, you're probably right. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what I can really speak to with him specifically. But he, again, is a creator who is very much alive, very much around. And if he has done anything, eventually, I am hopeful that if any creators have done something that is not to be supported and have caused harm to others, that the world will have the opportunity to know. Now, what happens though is when you've got creators that are no longer alive, especially when they haven't been alive for a long time, what do you do then? But then you also have creators like Michael Jackson, which I'm glad Rusty brought up, because it's like, well, what do you do with a creator like that who has a very, very negative social perception? And there is a lot of stress for many people about can you engage with Michael Jackson's music? How, and is it even really that possible to completely divest from it, considering how consistently it is still played all over? Like, if a Michael Jackson song comes on at a family reunion or a family get together or any type of like social situation or event, do you just sit down? What do you do? And it's interesting because on the other hand, you also have people like R. Kelly, where R. Kelly, if an R. Kelly song comes on, it, I don't imagine many people who are like aware or comfortable being aware of his very sincere crimes would want to celebrate that music or involve themselves with it much. But at the same time, why is Michael Jackson different? Why would he be seen as different? Is it because his music has a wider appeal to different groups of people that it's harder to divest from his music? I don't know. Grant says, I feel like it's better now that he isn't profiting. It's his kids and they have been through enough. And in that, I actually think that's a very, I appreciate that perspective, because I think that is one of the things I was going to bring up is like, okay, so say an artist you love has passed away and has been passed away for a while, but obviously their art is still in circulation, is still creating some kind of profit. People are still buying it. Who then profits from those sales? Is it the estate? Oh God, really, Rusty? Amazing Grace was written as Rusty says. Amazing Grace was written by John Newton, a enslaver captain, or a person who ran ships with enslaved people. That's the yeah, basically part of the slave trade. Bad person, very bad person. That oof, oof, oof. Do you want to support what happens? Like, do you want to support that person? I am going to argue that no, you probably, or I at the very least, don't want to support financially an artist that has committed such horrendous crimes as enslaving others, or as, you know, predating or doing anything that I think is very sincerely cruel and harmful, supporting anti-trans rhetoric. Another thing, like J.K. Rowling. But what do you like? What about when they are not able to profit anymore because they are quite incredibly not alive? Then I think it leads us to a different situation, which Brand had brought up, is like, what about what the people who come after? A lot of times these artists do leave estates. Those estates end up in a willed to certain people, and they're probably the descendants of that artist. Are those descendants guilty for the crimes of their relation to somebody? I don't think they should be, unless those people themselves have been found to have done something abhorrent as well. Then I don't think that there should be a negative pushback on them. You shouldn't be held to a criminal standard for the sins of a family member. Instead, Brant brings up, well, wait, Disney was very problematic, but now it's a major company. And Brant also asks, do you throw away some of the great work that has come since? And Ellie says, I'm of an opinion that once an artist releases a piece of art, that art belongs to the masses, the people. Ultimately, it's the people who decide whether it's worth digesting. I like these perspectives a lot. Well, I think that's a really beautiful way to explore this idea and this concept, is maybe there is an alternative to simply engaging or disengaging. In 2018, I believe, Gauguin, the Met, I think, put on a retrospective of Gauguin's work, the artist who had been a contemporary and close friend of Vincent van Gogh. And they had even been roommates. And as soon as I hear roommates, I'm like, roommates. Okay. Okay. But I mean, that's me projecting hardcore, so please don't take that. Rusty says the offense should be expanded to society, not just a particular individual. Ooh, and let me see if I understand properly. Rusty, does that mean that if an artist has committed a deep offense, that the offense should be considered by everyone who engages with the art made by that artist, because the art has now been released into the world, and the art itself, as I guess, as kind of as Ellie was saying, belongs to the people. So it's up to us to decide how to respond. Or is there an alternative thought process that I am missing? Please let me know. Um, Also, totally unrelated, but y'all, look, I got a chair. I can spin. This is so exciting. Okay. Anyways, sorry. I just got very excited because I just keep being able to move around and spin and actually not try and I'm not falling off of a yoga ball like I normally am. um, Rusty says, I mean, society has a role in the offense. And then Ellie says, therefore, I believe that even if the artist doesn't intend to evoke a certain meaning in their art, it's ultimately just as valid as a meaning they do intend. Example, Harry Potter being a trans allegory. Ah, and then Bran also says, I think it all depends on the person and offense. If the art is problematic, get rid of it. Ooh, okay, so here's another component to this that I think is important, is like maybe as a audience, especially when an artist is no longer alive, we have an opportunity to explore and investigate on a personal level how we want to engage with art that is no longer directly profiting the artist who has caused harm to others or is able to consistently harm others. Whereas when it comes to, there's also an opportunity to examine what the people who are now profiting from the artist's estate are espousing. For example, I was actually thinking of the Gandhi sisters because Mahatma Gandhi was and is still considered very positively on a major level, but his daughters ended up being horrific for India and very horrific to their own country. Their the government, like they ended up gaining a lot of social support because of their name and their father, but they themselves turned out to be very cruel people who supported very cruel restrictions on the freedoms of Indian people. So that maybe gives us an opportunity to look another step and see what has gone on after the artist has passed and what their work is continuing to profit and is continuing to support. Because if the people who are profiting off of that art are not good people, then perhaps we still have the opportunity to engage with the art the way that we would if we were engaging with art made by somebody who's still alive. And that does mean that I think there are people who may feel frustrated by that because it requires more work from us as the audience. Um, yes, Brent, I was very much always on a yoga ball because I was bouncing or I was moving around or I was falling off of it a lot because I would try and balance on one leg because it's me. And then also Brent brought up Disney as well. Yes, and oh yes, Brant brought up Song of the South by Disney. And you're right. Disney was very problematic. He was actually incredibly, like horrendously anti-Semitic, had a lot of very racist ideals, and was for sure not a good boss. There were also a lot of stories that are hard to, I'm not sure if they are real or not real, that are kind of floating about in the world about the way that he treated his animators and the ways that those animators would then quietly rebel when creating the movies and different art for Disney. But I let me see. There was something that was said. Um, okay. Oh, okay. So then that also leaves a question about what about when you have artists who don't seem to have any heirs who are doing anything problematic themselves or who are utilizing the profit from the art made by their ancestor in a negative way. What do you do then? Because technically, by that mentality, then like you wouldn't necessarily need to hold the modern day um, people who may be able to profit from that art accountable towards the sins of their ancestor. Um, Ellie says, I think it's important to tell great stories regardless of where they come from. It belongs to the people, so we are entitled to add changes, such as the show Lovecraft County. Mm-hmm. Well, also, H.P. Lovecraft was a mess. Aleister Crowley was an awful person. They were all not good people. Profoundly, deeply, deeply racist people. Deeply sexist, deeply racist people. Very harmful towards those around them. Um, and they also did uh, re not reinstate, they did propagate some of those mentalities in their art, but it is easier to look at those pieces of art and say, well, it was just a product of their time. So are we going to hold people accountable to the standards of our modern day understandings of racism and sexism and predation? Or are we going to kind of say, well, it was a product of their time? And that then also has to leave us with questions about who we can support if that's the case, because the norms of different eras, depending on when various pieces of art were made, could absolutely remove from, I guess you could say, a comfortable canon the majority of artists. Because a lot of artists, depending on the time period that they were creating, would have held beliefs that were vastly cruel in comparison to our modern day understandings of humanity. And that is, I think, still an important conversation, even if it is an uncomfortable one. And I have this idea that to some degree, one does need to recognize and examine our own feelings of frustration with an artist when they do maintain or hold beliefs that were perhaps not negatively regarded in their time frame, but we now recognize as negative. For example, when H.P. Lovecraft or Lester Crowley has any component of racism in their work, and or abuse dynamics in their work that are not seen as negative. And from my perspective, I do feel like it's probably a good thing for us as readers when we are taking in that art to recognize that the ick is there for a reason. But does that disqualify the art from its existence? Does that disqualify us as a audience from taking in that art? And I actually don't think it does. Brant, I like that. Okay. Brant says, well, some art can always be kept for historical purposes with praise done with asterisks. And I do think that's important. I do think that it is very important to be able to recognize that a large reason that many of us have certain frustrations with art of any era, or that we even want to excuse art that propagates racist or misogynistic or cruel beliefs, are to some degree wanting to find a sense of camaraderie with the creator of the art that we resonate with. So when it comes to, say, example, Oscar Wilde, and I always held him in like a positive, kind regard. But am I going to be able to read his work now and have the same sense of support about him? I probably will have a more nuanced and also bittersweet understanding of his work going forward, because I cannot simply avoid the fact that he was a predator. But does the talent that he has and his dedication towards that talent diminish due to his cruelty? I can't say that it technically does, but it does shift the way that I see his work. And when that happens, I think that gives us an opportunity to recognize our own agency as the audience. We have a lot more agency and are significantly less helpless when it comes to interacting with art than I feel like a lot of narratives about this conversation traditionally follow. So Brent says, we can choose not to use the Confederate flag, but still put it in a museum for people to learn. Yes, that's true. And Ellie says, at some point we're going to hold views that seem outdated. What matters is whether we evolve from those views or do we stay behind. So witnessing the views of older figures can't be measured well. Brant says, no reason to praise. Like, for example, having a Confederate flag but still maintaining one in a museum. You're right. So I think that's the importance of also recognizing that negative human components do not need and should not be ignored in the favor of viewing an artist or a creator in a positive light, or to be allowed to interact with that art. I think rather, and this I think makes a lot more people uncomfortable, is that we do kind of have a responsibility to recognize the ways that art that we may really love that comes from much older creators who have no longer in this realm of existence are problematic, and we can still read those things and recognize that. That doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to identify with the artist. And I think this is one of the core problems that a lot of this conversation has, is it kind of avoids some of the parasocial mentalities that we unintentionally end up creating with creators we really admire. Like, I love Mary Shelley. I love Mary Shelley. I love Frankenstein. Do I actually love Mary Shelley? No, I have no idea anything about. I don't know who she is. I have never, obviously, will never meet her. Are there mentalities that she espouses that I could probably find problematic? I'm sure there are. Even though she was the, daughter of a huge abolitionist and a profound feminist, can I just automatically assume that every mentality, every thought process, every belief she held was something that I would espouse myself? No, but that's not my responsibility as an audience member. My responsibility as an audience member is, when reading her work, recognizing the components of her creations that I do resonate with and the components that I am learning from. Her perspective as a creator is still valid, but that doesn't mean that I can't take that perspective with a bit of nuance and even a grain of salt when I come across information that forces me to recognize that there may be mentalities or thought processes or beliefs that she held that I would find deplorable. Now, do I have any particular beliefs that I'm upholding with Mary Shelley specifically as like deplorable? No, I don't. I don't have anything specific about Mary Shelley. But I'm going to go back to Oscar Wilde. Am I comfortable again with the fact that he's a predator? Nope. 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 But I don't need to be comfortable with him being a predator to recognize that his art is still a valid creation. And anytime I interact with his work, I have to recognize that that is a component of the creator who made the work that I am appreciating. And I think a lot of people do find that concept frustrating because it feels too ambiguous. It feels a little bit easier and a little bit better if you can just say, throw it out, or it doesn't matter. Like, ignore the thing that maybe gives you a twinge, or and find a reason for why it's okay, or you are going to just completely need to get rid of it. I don't think it's that black and white. And Brant says, you are never going to agree with anyone all the time. Plus, that would be boring. And you're right, Brant. You're very right. I think recognizing that the artist who creates the art, as has been kind of indicated a couple times in this live already, is that our relationship to the artist is not a thing. We don't truly have a relationship to the artist as an audience member. What we have is a relationship to how the art they made us feel, and the lessons that that artist perhaps was able to explain or explore or even personify in their work that was moving or important for us at various points of time. That those lessons are not invalid. The ways that I appreciate Oscar Wilde's wit and the wordplay that he demonstrated so aptly, and the ways that that ultimately ended up, I guess you could say, influencing maybe even how I think about what wit is, or created my standard for what is good or bad writing, because inherently, like, a lot of the writing that we gravitate towards or that is socially upheld as a positive piece of writing, or not even a positive piece of writing, but a well-regarded piece of writing, is often formed by those major creators. Edgar Allan Poe is another really good example. Do I really, really love Edgar Allan Poe's work? Yes, I do. Is he a predator? Was he a predator? Absolutely. An incestuous predator? Yes. So, and then Ellie is saying, I wonder about the author and the image they fight that is created inside the mind of the audience. The image of Neil Gaiman, for example, seemed a lot kinder and more human than the actual Gaiman. Yes, actually, that is exactly the thing. Now, this is where in my when the artist betrays their art in you video, I talked about the concept of branding, and how branding is something that with a live, like an artist who is still alive, they are able to consistently employ, and furthers our sense of frustration and alienation when an artist that we respect turns out not to be a good person, but their branding is that of a very good person. So Hugh Jackman and Neil Gaiman are really good examples of this, because both of them were able to utilize the best components of themselves and then essentially turn that into their PR. Neil Gaiman was probably, and probably still is, somebody who is a very warm and kind and thoughtful individual, if he wants you to think so. Does that invalidate any time that he as a human being was ever warm? No. Does it invalidate any time as a human he may have ever had an altruistic mentality, or sincerely had a desire to call out injustice or cruelty? No. Does it invalidate the entire Calliope story about the muse that he explored in one of the Sandman stories? It was entirely about how women are used negatively by toxic masculinity and patriarchy until they are for inspiration, for support, for finance, until they're used up and no longer useful. He definitely explored that in a very nuanced way. Can he recognize all those things and still perpetuate that harm? Absolutely. So yeah, probably did. It probably did. I don't even know what face I'm making, but yes, it probably did. But that's the thing, is that I think two truths can be true at once. And if we hold too fast to the kind of singularity of a person, especially if they're an artist that has public scrutiny, then we avoid the reality of what it is to be human, which is that you can be somebody who is extraordinarily soft and kind and thoughtful and caring and altruistic and very well intended and also actionable in your positive intentions. And that, to translate that, is like you actually do something positive to help inspire and initiate change on a grand scale. Can you also be a horrific, terrifying figure for certain people? Yes. Gandhi is another great example of this. He was somebody who was a is often just his name alone has become associated with the concept of peace. He led the closest thing to I guess you could call it a peaceful revolution. He ousted English colonialism, and at the same time, he also would purposely have very young women sleep in bed next to him to test himself. And we don't really know what happened with that. But he would very much utilize the sense of safety and the bodies of others for his own desire to either find his own, like, verify his own sense of purity. But either way, he was not viewing these people as human. He was viewing them as objects to be used. And for somebody who seemed so capable of nuance in so many other ways, that might seem very contradictory. Or Mother Teresa, she was actually an absolutely horrific person. Absolutely horrific person. She was very, very, very cruel to many, many, many people. She was a very dangerous person for lots of people who were vulnerable. But is her name held up as literally a saint? Yes, it is. Was that a PR stunt? Yes, it was. And was it effective? Yes, it was. Obviously. But that doesn't mean that Mother Teresa was never, ever an unkind person, or was never ever a kind person. It just means that there are multiple layers of nuance to how we need to interpret people that we look up to, or people who create things that we find to be important. And so that brings us to another component, which is like how much of the artist is in the art that they make. And inherently there's got to be their mentalities is in the art. It is their worldview and understanding of the world, even if they're writing about things that maybe are fantastical, that are physically impossible. It doesn't um it doesn't really always matter. And Brant says, well, Rosa Parks wasn't the first to be arrested for not going to the back of the bus. You're right. You're very much right. There was actually a teenage girl who was the first one, and she was actively encouraged not to be highlighted because of colorism, which is sickening. But again, this decision was made by people that we uphold as in very positive ways, for challenging and just doing their best to disrupt and destroy a system of horrific cruelty. And like, racism is cruelty. That is not even a question. Ellie says, I'm not much of a man of faith, but I really admire the Islamic belief to not portray Muhammad or Jesus because they believe people would worship the image over the person themselves. Yes, I actually, which is hilarious because if you go any house that I was in as a child, and it's like Jesus is everywhere. Uh, Literal shrines to Jesus everywhere, and it's the white man who was an Italian man's son, but okay. And Brant is also talking about there's a single mother before Rosa Parks, but that but the movement waited for the right messenger. But that's the reality of making change sometimes. Is it, again, that is a component of these conversations that needs to be had. You can hold the frustration and the anger about somebody who was denied the social support of a very important action in this specific instance, in favor of somebody who is seen as more palatable for the wider audience, and be very frustrated about it. You can be very sickened by the fact that that was seen as a necessary movement. But you probably also need to recognize that there are larger components at play than just the people involved in making those decisions. The colorism that inspired that decision was a set of systems that had been integrated into the structure of enslavement for generations. So there is a lot more that the people who were making those decisions had to work through and work with in order to navigate the corruption of the system they were living in. And that invariably led to somebody being left behind. And so that is it's very difficult. It's very frustrating. And as somebody who is able to look at it comfortably from my little pink chair over here, I can very comfortably and without any type of struggle just analyze and think about it as a concept. I don't have to deal with the reality of making those decisions at the time that they were made. They were made eras before I was born. So it's tough because, again, that brings us back to this idea of like ideating the artist who creates art that we appreciate or care for or was moving for us or important as important as the art itself. And I think, as was kind of explored so far in today's live, is that the art itself has the ability to become something else once it is released into the world and others interpret it. So what does that leave the artist? Because inherently the artist still has and in creating that art does leave an imprint of their mentality. I mean, it's undeniable that one's personal view of the world is going to absolutely affect who shows up in the worlds you create. I mean, look at Lena Dunham in Girls, where she had almost no characters of color and absolutely no Black characters in her work. And her defense of that was like, oh, well, I didn't really grow up with that many people around who are not white. It's just like, I don't like Lena Dunham to begin with, so Brand is talking about people have made those sacrifices now to not fully speak up against the Trump administration, to continue to do good work and not be a target. It's really tough to it's really tough when there is like such extremes that are going on. Like, for example, right now we have a very sincere issue where we have a very terrifying government playing out. I mean, I wouldn't be wearing these earrings otherwise if I didn't have to, if there wasn't. But also at the same time, like, is this particularly any, no, it's just, it's an acknowledgement of something that is very obvious. But there are so many sacrifices, so many decisions, so many very painful and horrific responses that we have to try and figure out how to make when we're dealt with cruelty and we're dealt with the inhumanity of evil coming from people who don't feel pressured or uncomfortable by it and find power in it. So that leaves all of all of us who do find evil uncomfortable and cruel and don't find any power in it, and I definitely don't benefit from that power. Very frustrated, very sad, and very angry, very ready to and needing to find a way to respond and to make sure that that energy, that mentality is not the ruling energy that gets a chance to negatively impact huge swaths of people. Honestly, it shouldn't impact a single person, but here we are. Now we have to try and adjust. We have to try and course correct. For many of us, for decisions that were not made by us, they were made by people who don't see us as human beings, and find comfort in that fact. So I mean, this is really interesting because it's definitely opened a can of worms that is maybe a little bit deeper than what was I maybe anticipated when we started this conversation. Ellie, I like that. Oh no, officer, simply suggesting of my hatred of finding ice cubes in my beverages. I have no idea what you were referring to in regards to Homeland Security. What? Yeah. Indeed, indeed. Yes, that is what this is about. I just don't like ice cubes. They hurt my teeth. They do. Anyways, yes. But okay. So we've kind of, I feel like, okay, let's kind of trace back a little bit. We've talked a little bit about, like, you know, I brought up Pablo Picasso briefly, Oscar Wilde, and Edgar Allan Poe, but I also didn't have, like, and Gauguin a little bit. But there was something that with Gauguin that I wanted to bring up that I think is a helpful opportunity for us as an audience now. It is very European of me. I will actually be honest, I don't actually like ice in my drinks. I am, unless it's iced coffee, that is the only thing. And even then, I'm a light ice type of person. Yeah. But anyways, there was this really interesting response that I found to be very positive, and it is in reference to Gauguin again. The painter there was a retrospective of the work of that painter at, why do I keep forgetting what the name is of the museum was? It wasn't the Met, was it not the Met? I don't remember. But there was a retrospective of his work, and because it was also the Me Too movement at that era in 2018, the museum decided to not just put his work on display and try and avoid the reality of what his work was depicting, because his work is depicting the naked children that he was having predating on, who were many of them of color, and were being portrayed as less than human, as well as the entirety of their homes as less than than human. It's very, very colonial lens, very frustrating. But they chose, when displaying those artworks, to have a consistent discussion where, for one, in the little cards, the placards that they would place next to the art, they would acknowledge the issues that were present in the art itself. And they would hold these discussions with people of various persuasions who had both, like, who came from multiple mentalities about how to interpret the art now that Gauguin had been long dead, and have a conversation about it and allow audience and viewers to interact and contribute to that conversation, so that every person could individually come to their own conclusion about how they felt when it regards to seeing Gauguin's work, wanting him to be upheld in any method, in any manner at all. And they very purposely chose to ensure that there were perspectives from those who thought Gauguin and everything in relation to him should be burned, and then those who were like did not think that his work should be forgotten or destroyed, and rather thought that it should be evaluated. And then you'd also have the people who are like, well, he's dead, what does it matter? And that is, all of those perspectives ultimately get to a greater whole. They give you an opportunity for multiple nuanced perspectives to glean from what, then decide what you actually think. And I think that we as a populace have gotten pretty comfortable with the idea of instant gratification in the form of answers. You see this especially common with AI, and how AI has been integrated into every search engine that we have now, where regardless if you want the AI there or not, unless you know how to do some better computer commands, it's hard to remove it. And you get instant answers that tell you what you should think, or what the general consensus might be that should more than likely persuade you to think in a particular direction. It's ultimately your decision to take that information in and decide what you think. But at the same time, a lot of times people don't always want to investigate further or even question their perspective about what they're learning. Instead, you'll have this kind of instant gratification of, well, this is what it says. This is the fact that is being said. And that is not always the case. Sometimes it does require us, and this is especially the case with art, is it does require us to ask more and to interrogate our own feelings and why we want to find comfort in certain things. And it is uncomfortable for sure. Yeah, Ellie's like, yeah, Microsoft Copilot, for example. Yes, exactly. Microsoft Copilot. I was really frustrated even because like I had strong hopes for DuckDuckGo. DuckDuckGo is no longer, it turns out it's owned by Bing this whole time. Whole time. Oh my gosh. And so it's also integrated AI, and you cannot fully divest or remove it. It's quite a lot. Really, Brant? If you get a chance, are they in a place to be able to hear at all that AI is not, it will respond, not necessarily always hallucinate, but it will respond based on what will encourage you to use it even more. So it can lie, or at the very least can give advice that is not necessarily the most accurate or the most impartial, even though I think socially many people feel that AI is supposed to be impartial in its advice. It actually isn't. And that is important to keep in mind. I understand that it is convenient, but it is actually not impartial, especially when it comes to legal components like a divorce. That is actually an extraordinarily difficult, definitely difficult situation that shouldn't, like, AI is not, it's not the way to find that information. Oh, he's an attorney? Oh, Brant, does he know about how AI has been hallucinating and creating cases that didn't even exist in order to create briefs and the type of documentation that a lot of attorneys need to try their cases? Yeah, yeah. Ooh, Ellie, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. So yeah, but ultimately, yeah, ultimately, I do think that it's a really good thing for us to have these conversations, because sitting in that space of like having to individually evaluate every piece of art that you come across can feel really exhausting, because a lot of times we turn to art as an opportunity to give ourselves space to process our existence. And that can mean through the concept of turning our brain off for a minute, But most of the time, I actually think that that means that it gives us a space to process in the background while we are able to disengage from hyper focusing on whatever component of our lives at that moment might be a little overwhelming. And Ellie says it's one of those Stewie Griffin voice clones. I haven't seen those. Oh my god. You never know where the help is gonna come from, but here we are. That's hilarious. That's so funny. But anyways, I think that a lot of the advice in regards to how to navigate this situation is not very cut or dry. And because of that, it can feel exhausting. But if we can try and remember when it comes to interacting with art, especially for artists who are no longer alive, we have options. First, we can evaluate what is currently happening with the finances that the artist is gaining from our support. Is it going to things that we feel comfortable with as an audience person? Is it something that we would want to finance? Like, if we were going to be handing money to that situation, is that something we're comfortable with? And if not, then that gives us an answer. Now, the next level is, say there is nothing that is giving us any type of ick. Maybe there's no reason to feel uncomfortable with what's going on with the people or the heirs or the estate or the organizations that are now collecting the profits from continued support of that artist's work. Then you kind of do have to have you kind of have to decide how you're going to feel about that art when you are engaging with it. And being able to recognize that artists are impossible to fully extricate from the work they create. Rather, that when you come across components of the art that doesn't feel right, or that you recognize now are uncomfortable, sit with the discomfort and recognize that the art itself may have been formed from a perspective that is uncomfortable, but the perspectives that are still deeper are still important. You can hold two truths to be true at once. An artist's creation can be full of things that are cruel and awful, and they can still have kernels of truth within them. So, being able to kind of explore what that is and take both to be a valid recognition when it comes to how you experience that art does require a little bit more work, but it is not, I think, a negative in the whole of the experience. I like that, Rusty. Rusty says evolved humans can separate the good from the bad. I do like that. I do think that a lot of people find that very the concept in of itself quite exhausting, because I think so many of us are in this space of feeling as if it's just another layer of work piled on top of us as the audience. But if anything, it's an opportunity for us to recognize our own agency and our power. And I hope eventually that mentality can become more of an enthusiastic experience than a exhausting one. Yeah. Rusty says depraved people are still God's children, as hard as it is to believe. That is one form of thinking about it for sure. If you know, that's definitely one method to process this entire concept for sure. Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting to be in this space and to have to ask these questions. And I still think it's necessary because it allows us the opportunity to recognize that our own voice is actually significantly more powerful, and we don't always have to view people who create things we find important as better than us because they're able to articulate things that we maybe don't quite have the same knack to articulate. Rusty says each of us have a seed of evil or have capability for it. Well, okay, so I actually, yes. Rusty, one thing that I think is quite important when it comes to like evaluating us as humanity is that all of us have the capability for all things, and different components of all the things we are capable of are important at different points of time. Like, conflict as a whole is not actually a thing that should be demonized, depending on how that conflict is structured. Like, there is a need, depending on the situation, and again, it's very dependent on the situation, for there to be people who are comfortable with immediately addressing a wrong or a issue or calling out a problem. And then there's also a need to have people who are also comfortable with sitting back for a second and evaluating a situation before responding in full. Both are important. And anger, fear, even greed to some degree is all important in the grand scheme of how we operate as people. What is not great is when we go into excess with those specific things. So if we allow our greed to harm others or harm ourselves, instead of being a helpful motivating factor towards betterment or towards a grander goal, then it can become quite problematic and quite cruel and quite unhelpful for the community. And by default, then ourselves as well. If we allow our anger to explode onto others, whereas anger can be very helpful for recognizing wrongs and responding to them without fear of, say, certain social repercussions, then it can be a very helpful guiding force. So even our most negative experiences, our most negative components of humanity, can be helpful guiding forces towards doing ultimately what could be right for the good of the community. Brent says no one is perfect, but it also depends on how you act when you make a mistake. That is true. That is true. So, but I think it's just when we hyper or we focus a little too much, or we are too comfortable with not holding accountability as a necessity for all of the components of us as people and what goes into making a human, that we encounter issues like we are seeing in our current political climate, where there is very specific components of a person that are being highlighted without any kind of accountability or check, and there is a incredible harm to the community as a whole that we are all experiencing. That is not okay. Or like with Oscar Wilde and going after children, or Gauguin going after children, or so many others and going after children. That's a no. That's a no. That's not even a question. That's a no. So it's like, ugh. But it's it's still important to evaluate on an individual basis and make a informed decision based on what you feel truly comfortable with, and also what challenges you to think deeper about every single one of these people and the art that you're taking in. Brent says, we have a check coming this November. Please vote. Indeed, you're very right. Please do make sure that you're involved in your local governments and recognize that you do have a lot more agency and power than it feels like right now. But if we don't utilize it, then obviously we can't do very much with that. And I know that there's a lot of commentary, a lot of understandable frustration and growing apathy in regards to maintaining a system that was built not to work effectively for many of us. And I understand. I also recognize that I don't know how we are going to undo all of that without overwhelming harm to many. So, at least in our present state, in our present day, what we can do to start shifting things is utilizing the agency and the power that we do have. So, use your voice and vote when you can. Okay, I think I've come to a relative conclusion, but I would love to know what you think. And if anybody didn't make it for the live stream and did come across my video and has any thoughts, please don't forget to let me know in the comments. I am still working on my video my next video, which should be hopefully coming out soon, but I will keep everybody updated. And I appreciate everybody so much for the conversation today. Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you for having this conversation with me and each other. I always learn so much when interacting with everyone, so I appreciate it immensely. If you haven't yet, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Is it this? Is it? I don't know. Somewhere around here. Somewhere down there. Hit the subscribe button. Thanks. Also, if you're interested in any of I do Sunday night watch parties on Discord where we watch movies and then talk about stuff, or TV show episodes, then jump into my Discord. It's in my bio, and I'll see you there. All right. Thank you. Good night, everyone.